Welcome to the Next Generation Dog Podcast, hosted by Melinda Benbow of Urban Uplander Pet Care and Bethany Carter of Sanguine Moon Kennels. Join Melinda and Bethany as they discuss dog breeds, sports, training, health, and much more with special guests. Tune in weekly for all things dedicated to dogs.
Well, welcome back to another episode of the Next Generation Dog Podcast. My name is Melinda Benbow. Today is a fun episode because we do have some NAVHDA NA tests coming up. So, of course, we have a wonderful representative of NAVHDA coming on to explain it a little bit more to us, give some details, introduce us to her kennel, the NAVHDA testing system, and especially the NA test. So, again, I have my host here with me, Bethany Carter. Do you mind saying hello and introducing our guest?
Yes, it's always a pleasure to have you guys listening today. We have Kat from Standing Stone Kennels. This is a kennel that holds really gold standards for GSPs. It's a kennel that I really look forward to not only communicating with NAVHDA, but also the abundance of knowledge that you have with your program and GSPs and titling and health testing and all of its entirety.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely. So now that we got the objectives down, do you want to give our listeners kind of like an introduction on who you are, who Standing Stone Kennel is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Kat Pippitt, one of the owners of Standing Stone Kennels. My husband's the other one, so I'll give him some credit. And we have a German Shorthair Pointer breeding program, as well as we train all breeds of dogs, primarily hunting dogs and primarily versatile hunting dogs, but also the random English Cocker, Lab flows through the kennel every once in a while as well. And then we have a few litters every year that we try and find great family hunting homes for, as well as we have put a lot of time into our social media presence through our YouTube channel. So if you want to do it yourself, train from home, we've put a lot of resources out there for you, as well as we have, a few podcast episodes of our own when we have time, which is in high demand, I guess.
Yeah, you guys are very busy over there. I know when I started my bird dogging journey, I definitely have a wonderful mentor, but most specifically, you guys have those quest videos on your YouTube, and those were my my platform and what I did with my first bird dog all the way through. And they're very helpful. So I do recommend anybody check those out. And again, thank you for coming on. You can tell Bethany and I are like starstruck right now. Like in our community of Upland, Kat's like a superstar. So we're super excited. But today is definitely a NAVHDA conversation for versatile hunting dogs. It's one of those tests that is kind of a standard testing system. So could you give our listeners an idea of what NAVHDA is?
Yeah, so NAVHDA is the North American Versatile Hunting Dog Association. It's a registry similar to AKC in that they're registering versatile dogs, so dogs that have pointing instinct, and then they have a testing system of their own created to hold these dogs to a standard that is being judged against. It's not a competition. I want to make that clear. Some people don't necessarily know what a hunt test is. Both in AKC and NAVHDA, if you're going to a hunt test, you're going to compete against a standard, not the other dogs at the test. Now, if you're talking field trials and things like that, that's different. That's a competition, but that's not what NAVHDA is about.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. And I think a lot of people do forget that. It's just a way to see what your dog's standard is to a particular standard, not against each other. So the first test of NAVHDA is the NA test. And this is what Bethany and I are going to be doing mid-March. I think March 18th and 19th. We're headed to Four Rivers. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what an NA test is?
Yeah, absolutely. And good luck, you guys. Have
Thank you.
fun. That's what the judges will always tell you is have fun. We're not judging you, we're judging your dog. So the NA test is the natural ability test. And that's truly what is being judged at that test is the puppy's natural ability to do specific tasks. There's a water portion, a field portion, and a tracking portion. And then we are also looking at physical attributes of the puppy, not necessarily in a sense of like, oh, if your puppy doesn't have a great coat or is missing a tooth, it's not like, oh, well, you can't prize today. No, we're just documenting that information as well, which is something that I want to mention is the NAVHDA test registry database is an amazing resource. So you can go and you can search a dog's name and you can see their test results. So if your puppy runs their NA test twice, you get to see both of their test results and what they scored in each of those different phases of the test, which is not only a great resource for breeders so that we can look back at a litter of puppies and see how many puppies ran, how well they did, if there was any places that they specifically struggled. Let's say most of the puppies didn't score as well as we'd like to see in the water. Maybe we would adjust our breeding plans the next time around so that we can get some more water love out of the next litter. So that's just a way that those testing records can be used, and it's a great resource. But the NA test, the natural ability test, can be run anytime before the puppy turns 16 months old, so just shy of a year and a half. They can run older than that, but they're not going to get a score for like their registry and database stuff. It's just for evaluation purposes. So it's basically a puppy test, right? You've got a puppy that's under a year and a half getting ready to run this test. And I don't want people to mistake that natural ability means no preparation. That is not the case either, but we don't need to see a fully finished, polished dog out there either. We're not judging any obedience in the natural ability test. We are judging cooperation and teamwork with their handler, but we aren't looking for this dog that's steady through, the flush of the bird or anything like that. So the natural ability test is a way to prepare your dog to be ready to go hunting. Anything that you would want your hunting dog to be able to do is what they're looking to see in the test. So we want our pointing bird dogs to point birds. We want them to be able to track the potential of a wounded bird. If you have a poor shot on something, break a wing, and the pheasant runs off, we want to be able to recover that game from a conservation standpoint. So there's that tracking portion that comes in. Let's say you shoot a bird and it falls into a slough or across a waterway. You're also going to want to be able to recover that game. And so the swimming portion is part of that as well. So there is a gun sensitivity portion because if we're hunting our dogs, we're going to be shooting over them. So all of these things are part of the evaluation process. And I feel they are all great things to be preparing your dog to be a hunting dog. And because of the 16-month age limit on it, it kind of pushes people to get going rather than, oh, they're just a puppy, they're just a puppy, they're just a puppy, and they're 2 years old. They're not a puppy anymore. And if you didn't get started on things, you might have a lot more bad habits to be overcoming at that point. So it kind of, lights the fire to get you going.
That's awesome. Thank you for that explanation. I'd really like to kind of elaborate a little bit on, you mentioned that we should not be going into this without any form of preparation. What does that training look like?
So that is definitely different for every trainer, every handler, every owner, what level of exposure they want to have their puppy prepared for. And I think it also depends on the age of the puppy when they run the test and when they were born. So that plays a huge role for me on timing of puppy's first hunting season, things like that, and when they're going to be running their tests. But I would say at minimum, you want your puppy to be exposed to gunfire before your first day at the test. Don't go out there and think, oh, I've never shot around my dog. Let's just see what happens. So a gunfire introduction, a bird introduction, because they're going to be encountering, live birds, potentially, that tracking pheasant can be pretty startling to a puppy if they've never even been exposed to a pheasant before. So a gunfire, bird introduction, working on some of that obedience and the recall side of things. So puppy doesn't hit the field and it's a free for all and they never want to come back to mom and dad. We do want them to come back to mom and dad. Yep.
That was my biggest fear. We have got to run other dogs in the past. We're starting this year with our next dogs that are ready to hit the NA test. But that was my biggest fear with my first dog was the second I unleash her, she's just gonna dash into the sunset
Yep.
and be gone. But you're right. Those things that can create worse issues down the road are definitely the things that I say prioritize: gunfire, recall, socializing to birds. You'd be surprised how one poor interaction can mess up a dog's future interactions around these things and other things that are similar to them. So when it comes to the first portion, which is the field portion, what is our criteria out there? I know you said they have to point, but they don't have to be steady to flush. As a judge, what are you looking for when a pup hits the field for that portion?
So pointing, if you're referring to the NAVHDA Rules and Aims book, ends when the puppy is aware of the handler. So once they know you're present, we're done with pointing and we're on to the flushing sequence. And that isn't something that's being judged in the natural ability test because that's obedience. So that's part of the utility and the utility prep test. So the steadiness is not part of this. So as soon as that puppy knows you're there, pointing's over. We're definitely thinking about watching pointing. We want to see a puppy that is intense. It's an unmistakable point. The puppy is not looking around going, am I doing this right? We want to see some intensity out of that puppy, that they know their purpose, that they know there's a bird there and they've got it pinned. It doesn't necessarily have to be about style. We're not looking if a tail's up, tail's down, head high, head low, paw tucked. That does not matter. Style of the point has no bearing on the pointing score. And we definitely want to see that more than just a point pounce. We want to see some hesitation. I'm pointing for, a few seconds, even longer. And then, even if you get up close to your dog and then they take the bird out because they know you're there, pointing's already done, right? So we're done looking at that score. If your puppy has to try and see the bird instead of using their nose to point the bird, we're going to take that into consideration too, because we are judging nose, not just their sight pointing ability.
Absolutely. And then, so it sounds like just a couple seconds, point that bird. After that, it sounds like cooperation happens after that. If your dog does go into chase, gets away from you, this is probably when the judges are looking for, is that dog listening? Is it coming back? Is that about correct?
So cooperation actually involves pointing as well. You've got a puppy that is pointing really steadily and waiting for you to approach, things like that. That's a very cooperative dog, a dog that is waiting for the handler. They're cooperatively pointing this bird, even though their prey drive is wanting them to take it out. So we're looking at cooperation there, as well as the cooperation in the field. Like, hey, we're going to turn and work the field this direction. We want puppy to come with us. We don't just want puppy to go hunt themselves off that direction. So turning and handling with you and hunting to the front, not hunting behind you. We've already covered that ground. Let's cover the ground ahead of us. And then, like the chase that happens. So the bird gets flushed, the puppy chases, prey drive kicks in. We're not docking that puppy that they chased. We want to see that desire and that drive. But if this chase becomes, excessive, where puppy just will not come back, and we've wasted 15 minutes of our 20-minute search trying to get the puppy back into the field, trying to get them back on the next bird, that's when we're going to start seeing, our cooperation as well as our search score being affected.
Sure. That makes sense. I feel like Bethany and I had a nice learning curve our first time around.
We did.
We prepared. We didn't just show up, but, puppies will be puppies. And sometimes you have especially when you switch environments, dog training is generalized and it can throw a loop in for some dogs, and definitely did for mine. And, we left the field, and like you said, it's a puppy test. We left the field. We said, hey, all we have are notes on things to keep working on. So, sometimes they go great, sometimes they don't. So I love that. Is there anything else about the field portion, the bird searching, that you think our listeners should know?
So I think that it's a common misunderstanding that people think that they either can't talk to their dog at all out in the field, which is not the case. But we also don't want that constant communication with the dog to affect them in a sense, like if you're constantly hacking on your dog, hey, pup, 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 and they're not actually being able to hunt then because they're constantly coming back to check in with you. Great cooperation, but our search is also not great because they're not getting out and expanding and covering ground and finding birds for us. So you can absolutely talk to your dog, but keep in mind, if you're over handling and over hacking them, it's, your judge is probably going to say something to you, hopefully. Otherwise, it could affect how the rest of the day is scored in the search category. And we don't want that to happen. Otherwise, go out there, have fun. If you've prepared, your puppy knows how to point, how to use its nose. It's just a matter of letting them figure it out that day. And like you said, generalizing. So you are at your training grounds or wherever you train, and you're at a brand new place on test day most of the time. And there's lots of dogs and other people, and there's gunfire and birds, and there's so much excitement. So it's not uncommon for a puppy to lose their mind when they hit the field, because, this is the level of distraction, adrenaline pumping is a lot more than what they're used to on a normal training day.
And I think those training days are really valuable to join a chapter. I did find that our chapter was really helpful at least once a month, getting out there and working on these things and having some mentorship with experienced people. I think that's a really strong component that I encourage others to seek out as well.
Absolutely. And a lot of those chapters have the opportunity to set up mock training or mock test days at their training days. So they run you through a whole test, and it's like, oh, this is what it's going to be like on test day. And it makes the handlers, especially new handlers, a little more comfortable knowing exactly what to expect.
Yeah, I think that's so helpful. And the clinics as well.
Well, I love that. And then so now when it comes to the next phase, I can never remember. Does it go to tracking or water?
It absolutely depends on the day and what the judges want to do. And you don't necessarily have to hit the field first. Sometimes, depending on conditions, you may hit the water first. I know my very first NA test was pouring rain. So they actually had us do our water portion first. The dogs were already wet, might as well. So we did our water portion first, and then we moved on to the field and then tracking. I would say most of the time at tests I've been at, we're going to do field, then tracking, not tracking, then field most of the time, and then water wherever it mixes in. So it depends on the day and depends on the time of year. I know sometimes tests want to get, the field done first before the heat of the day rolls in. And absolutely, we want to make sure that we're not running dogs when it's 80, 90 degrees out, if at all possible.
I love that.
So the water portion, I'm really excited about this water portion. I have been lucky enough to have a water crazed dog. And so she was the one that was like pretending to dock dive during her NA test and really putting on a show. I know that AKC has their water test and you have to actually retrieve the bird, but that's not necessarily the case with NAVHDA. Can you elaborate some of those expectations?
Yes. And so the water portion of the NA test, you want to see a puppy that is entering the water without hesitation, going out. Whether they get the bumper and bring it back or not, absolutely doesn't matter. But again, there's cooperation involved. If your puppy hits the water and swims around and doesn't want to come out of the water for you, that's going to cause issues as far as their, cooperation score goes. If you have a puppy that doesn't want to go in the second time, we need to see the puppy swim at least twice. And we say that at least twice because it's not, after 10 bumpers, 20 sticks, and 16 rocks, we finally got our puppy to swim once. We just need to see him swim one more time. Most of the time, your judging team is going to want to see at least a third swim out of the puppy. We're judging on improvement, right? We're giving credit to these puppies that are improving. So if it took a ton to get them to go the first time, and then there was no hesitation that second time, we're going to want to see another. But that improvement is really important for us to be taking into consideration when we're putting a score on that.
Is there a distance that you want them to swim, or is there a behavior that you want to see actively swimming?
They can swim like an idiot and be super splashy as long as all 4 feet are off the bottom of the water or bottom of the bank and they're swimming. And every pond is going to be different. If you've got a pond with, we're looking for water entry that's going to be more gradual, not a sudden drop off, but you got to work with what you've got sometimes. And sometimes the water gets deep fast and you only have a 5-foot swim or 5 feet before you're swimming. Sometimes you've got a real gradual bank or a real tall puppy and you've got to have a 15-20 foot throw before you're seeing an actual swim. I always caution people not to overthrow their retrieve bumper because puppies can have off days too, or this water looks different, or it's a little more scary to them being surrounded by judges and all the other dogs barking and things. And they might not want to swim like they normally do, like their normal dock diving entry. And they're very hesitant, slow to enter the water. That's fine. But if you throw a bumper 30 feet out there, it's less enticing than a bumper that splashes 5 feet in front of them and just pulls them in right away. So don't just overthrow your bumpers. Try and ask where the swimming distance is and hit about where that's going to be, not, 5 times that distance.
So just don't go out there and yeet it.
Yeah, as well as, so this is something that I don't think all handlers think about or take into consideration, but as a judge and part of a judging team that, we've got 10 puppies we're running in a day maybe, and everyone wants to show off their puppies. We get that, but you throw, a 30-foot swim that takes a puppy how long to swim out, swim back twice, and then you do that times 10 puppies, we're eating up a lot of time. And there's a lot of parts of the test that can take a long time. So if we can be efficient in any place, we want to be. We're not trying to, cut your puppy short by any means. But we also don't need a 15-minute swim here.
Now, if you have a reluctant puppy, are you allowed to use a bird instead of a bumper? And if so, are there any, the scoring system, does it decrease with that?
So yes, if your puppy won't swim for a bumper and we want to see them swim, we'll ask them to come back after the rest of the puppies have had their opportunity and we'll allow them to swim for a dead bird. But at that point, we need to see no hesitation. The puppy can't dance around the shore, can't, tiptoe in. It needs to be a direct entry into the water for that bird. And you tease them up, or the puppy knows that you have a bird at this point. And if they're not willing to go for a bird, that's, absolutely, we're going to have a 0 in the water if they don't swim at all. But then their score is going to be deducted having to use a bird at the water for sure.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation.
Yep.
That makes, and it sounds like, same as anything, generalize these behaviors, practice in different waters, different inclines. In cold water, Bethany got me into dock diving this past year with the English setters, and my breed's not a notorious swimming breed. They love the water, but that cold water, when Jasper hits that second time, no, thank you, lady. That's too cold. So practicing in colder waters, warmer waters, I think all that's just going to help your dog find comfort in whatever.
Yes, absolutely.
You actually end up at
trying to generalize as much of the water as you can, because it's going to vary so much from test site to test site. Even as silly as like the different bumpers, like if your puppy's like, I absolutely love canvas bumpers, and you happen to go to a test that is using, soft mouth retrievers, they're all just, rubber, and your puppy's like, meh, not doing it for that. So just trying to generalize every portion of that you can. The more prepared you can be, the better.
Absolutely. I love that. And then, so I think now, actually, before we wrap up on water, is there anything else you want our listeners to understand about water?
No, just that after the water portion of the test, that's when they do the physical attributes portion, because we're judging coats when they're wet. Now, if you get a puppy that won't swim for a bumper, won't swim for a bird, you just note that, physical attributes and the coat was judged dry. So, we're looking at coat, we're looking at eyes, we're looking at teeth, bite, and then we're also looking if we've got a male, if their, testicles are there.
Now, this is one part of the portion of the test that I actually never really understood too much. What is the physical part kind of about, and why do we assess them when they're wet?
So we're looking, and give us judges a break. We are no professionals when it comes to every single breed out there. And we have done a lot of hands-on stuff. But again, I know that I've been at tests where my dog's coat was judged one way one test and then I ran them again and it was judged another way. And things like nutrition can play a role in what your dog's coat looks like. How beat up it is after hunting season can play a role. But so the things that we're looking at are eyes, mostly looking for entropion or ectropion, which is either, loose eyelids kind of sagging down or rolled in. Both are a problem. The ectropion can collect seeds and things like that and make the dog's eyes more susceptible to being irritated. Entropion, when that eyelid rolls in, those eyelashes can irritate the eye, cause cornea issues in the future. So just things for not only the owner to be aware of so that they can, look at the health of the dog, but also it's recorded again on their scores so breeders can look at that. And if a breeder's looking at their litter scores and they had 10 puppies and 8 of them are ectropion, then, hey, we probably want to reevaluate this cross and maybe not breed them together again. Things like that.
Awesome.
So the teeth and the bite, the same thing. We're looking at, do we have a good scissor bite? Is it overshot, undershot? Because teeth are an inherited thing as well. Most of the time, those teeth issues aren't really going to cause any problems. Unless you've got a tooth that they're narrow based and it's digging into the roof of their mouth, that might be something that you see that you'd make the owner aware of, that they can talk to their vet about maybe having to have a tooth pulled or capped or something. But again, shows up in the record, and then breeders can take that knowledge and go, oh, every single puppy that ran was, a butt bite. So we probably want to change that cross again. So it's mostly for evaluation for breeders. And coat, again, we're judging that wet when at all possible, because that's going to allow us to see from a really dense perspective. Sometimes in dogs that have a very dense coat, the undercoat won't even be wet after they've swam. And that's, for a dog that's a versatile dog that's going to be potentially used for duck hunting, is a very valuable trait to have a really nice thick coat, not only for, hardiness in the water, but also it's going to stand up in the field really well too, from a harsh, Milo stocks, things like that condition. So
I never thought of that.
Yeah. And then with the males, we're checking to make sure that we don't have undescended testicles, cryptorchid, monorchid, things like that.
Oh my goodness. So, and this is just the reminder, for myself and listeners, that this is a breed registry. It's not just a testing system. It's obviously a really good way for hunters to assess the structure of their dogs. And especially being that some of these dogs, aren't able to be in the show ring. It's just another way to really assess your dogs. So I think that brings us to our final portion, which is the most intimidating portion to me. I've had 2 runs at this, and I'm telling you, both have been a disaster. Actually, I don't think the first one was, but because I don't understand the judging and everything of it, I would love to know more about the tracking portion. So can you give us a rundown on that?
For sure. So I want to say one last thing about the physical attributes, because I think this is actually looked over by handlers and owners, is practice this as well. Because if you bring your puppy up to a group of 3 judges that might have a couple apprentices there, can be overwhelming, as well as if your puppy is going to be, temperamental about it, it might end up being marked down, that we couldn't judge their teeth because they were going to bite us, things like that. So make sure your puppy's comfortable being handled, not only for this part of the test, but also this is going to be important for, tailgate checks, things like that. When you're hunting with your dog, you need to be able to put your hands on them, especially if they did get poked by barbed wire and they're uncomfortable. Just letting them know that, hey, this is part of life, being handled, being looked over, checking all the places. That's just going to make them more comfortable, not only for the test, but in life in general. But so the tracking, because everyone wants to know about the tracking. So I always tell people tracking is the biggest crapshoot of the day, because there are so many things that are a part of this. So you've got to look at your wind, your scenting conditions, how dry it is, how moist it is, as well as the terrain, and your pheasants. Pheasants can do crazy stuff. Sometimes they hardly want to run. Sometimes they run like the dickens, and it's just every pheasant is going to be different. Sometimes they hop and try and fly and are crazy. So keep in mind, if your puppy aces every part of the test, but, struggled in portions of the track, but they were still cooperative, they had desire when they were trying to do their track, they just couldn't put the pieces together, that doesn't mean that you should just throw that puppy away and start over. They need some more experience, exposure. And I think age a lot of times, and breed plays a role. For example, dogs like Munsterlanders have very good track records, if you will. They really know how to focus, slow down, use their nose. It's really cool to see. Some of these higher power dogs, like my short hairs, and I'm not saying Monsterlanders aren't high powered. Please don't think that I'm saying that, but a little bit like balls to the walls. I'm overrunning the track and not using my nose. I'm a scattered brain short hair, and I breed short hair, so understand I'm saying this from a place of love.
Lovingly, yes.
Lovingly. So I think a big part of the track is getting your dog to focus and to know that we're doing something other than searching the field. So setting up tracking scenarios where, hey, we're slowing down now. We're going to slow you down and keep you focused on this scent, not just letting you break off and start searching and luckily happen upon the pheasant that we're trying to track, which happens. We call those fortuitous finds. Like, oh, how did that dog get from here to there? It was a fortuitous find. But I want to see some tracking. I want to see some acknowledgement on the scent, on the track itself. So keep that in mind, slowing the dog down in the focus. But also, I think that of all I don't want to say all the places, because handler error can really affect your water and water entry and getting your puppy out of the water too. But I would say how you release your dog at the track is really important, and practicing that and feeling comfortable doing that and understanding wind, and thinking about it and slowing yourself down when you do the release of the track is really important. If you don't feel your puppy is focused and on it and their head's up looking around, squirreling it, don't let them go. Bring them back around, refocus them on the feather pile. You can restart your puppy multiple times, take a couple steps. They are not focused. They're not on it. Your dog, bring them back around, do it again. But the moment you let them go, all bets are off, man. It's let's see what we got now. So slow down, be sure that your puppies actually acknowledge the scent before you release them. And then once they do, make it a very unobtrusive release. If your puppy's engaged and then you jerk their head up when you try and release their collar, they're disengaged and they have just been hugely distracted, and getting them to get back on that track is going to be more difficult. And now you just have to stand and watch it play out. So doing a really nice underhanded release where you basically open your hand and that puppy walks out, their collar just slides out of your hand. That's a really great way to do that. And then once your puppy's on the track, you just stand there and watch in the direction that you feel that the pheasant went, so that you're not a distraction to them either. And make sure your dog is peed and pooped, if at all possible.
Oh.
Because otherwise they get on their track. They've, been cooped up in their crate for a while, waiting their turn. And they're like, oh, finally, freedom. I got to pee. And then they stop and pee. And then they're like, now what am I doing out here? Because dogs have a one-track mind, and now they're distracted because they just thought about peeing and not about tracking. So trying to get them to get their business taken care of so they can be focused and not have an interruption during that track is also a little tidbit to think about.
I like that. I think, there's so many questions I have around tracking, but fortunately, we're going to be doing another episode focusing on the tracking portion, talking a little bit more about how we can get our dogs to do these things that you mentioned, how we can get them to slow down, focus on scent, practice better releases. So I'm super excited for that. That will actually be our next episode the following week. But other than that, I love this episode. I really feel like we hit the meat and potatoes of what NAVHDA is, what the NA test is. I think Bethany and I definitely feel like we have some clarifications on the things that we sit up at night kind of like questioning about our test and everything. So Kat, thank you so much for that. Bethany, as always, thank you so much for being here. You can check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, and Facebook. But Kat, can you go ahead and let our listeners know how they can find you?
Absolutely. So we have a website, standingstone.com. We actually have a supply store, standingstonesupply.com. So you can get all your dog training goodies there. And also YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, pretty much all the social platforms, and patreon.com. We also have a Patreon community where we help people train their dogs from home.
That's awesome. I think I've utilized it in the past, and you guys give feedback on videos and stuff. You guys do so much. I don't know how there's enough time in the day, but definitely check out Standing Stone Kennels. And Bethany and Kat, thank you ladies for jumping on.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Kat.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Next Generation Dog Podcast. Weekly episodes are released on Fridays on Spotify and YouTube. Please follow the Next Gen Dog Pod on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, and Facebook for even more content dedicated to all things dogs. Follow Urban Uplander Pet Care and Sanguine Moon Kennels on Instagram and Facebook.